From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, along with Jeff Wickman. Coming up today from the Livestock Marketing Information Center, Katelyn McCullock will discuss what's going on in the cattle markets. She'll point to the boxed beef trade as the lead influencer there at the moment, and she'll go over the LMIC's new analysis of the hay market. Also today, K-State's Ron Graber will offer some thoughts on developing alternate water resources for cattle as this prolonged dry weather has severely drawn down farm ponds and streams. He'll urge you producers to come up with long-term solutions to those water shortages. And Jeff will have this week's 4-H segment where K-State's Anissa Jepsen will preview the upcoming 4-H Science of Agriculture Challenge. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
This is Agriculture Today. Thanks for being along with us once more. As always on a Monday, we talk cattle market trends, and this time we turn to the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver. Katelyn McCullock is with us, and Katelyn, let's begin, as we usually do, with a quick glance back to the trading action this past week, the cash-fed cattle market. Not anything very exciting. It did give a bit of ground, but really nothing more than that.
Yes, so live steers faded a little bit late into this week, and we're trading around 107 in the 5 area. It's not necessarily worrisome. We have seen that connect to some lower box beef prices on the daily basis. That too gave a little ground late last week, down about 45 cents from Thursday. But the thing we have to keep in mind is this actually, for as abnormal as 2020 has been, that's a rather normal seasonal pattern for box beef. We usually see a dip here in October and maybe a little bit of strength come in later in the year, but not usually a lot of price movement from here on out. You still have the cattle on feed sector having fairly heavy weights come through. The percent of steers is still quite a bit larger than the percent of heifers in the slaughter mix. And so we still could be working through some struggles there, particularly from a regional perspective. We've seen daily average slaughter probably in September above a year ago. I don't know if that'll continue. And that too could play some roles here is where does that front end supply line up with that box beef demand? Unfortunately, 2020 from that perspective is still a big unknown as we head into the fourth quarter. Fourth quarter last year, retail beef demand was very, very strong. And I think it remains to be seen whether we see that again in 2020. The consumption patterns haven't been the same in the sense that we've moved everything to retail. I don't anticipate folks running out and participating in the restaurant sector quite the way they did last year. The other impact of that is the holiday season and holiday parties, going out, gathering with friends, eating steaks, ribeyes, prime rib, etc. usually does play into those types of social gatherings. And I'm not sure we're going to see quite the same participation that we did last year.
All bets are off here in 2020 in so many ways. Feeder cattle trade this past week. What are you seeing at the auctions, Katelyn?
The auction data has slipped a little bit here in October. We had a fairly strong September market from a regional basis nationally. We saw a lot of markets have very strong Septembers, and that's eased off a little bit. Most auctions are reporting week-over-week declines in the latest week of data. Now, that lines up with where we see more animals coming through those auction barns. We would typically see those runs start here in October, maybe a little bit earlier in September. So I think that price implication is really reflecting the higher volumes of the calf run just starting and seeing a little bit better volume through those markets. From a fourth quarter perspective, we would expect that price to maybe be a little weaker just based on what we've seen corn do over the last couple of weeks across all the weight categories. It just became quite a bit more expensive to feed those animals out. And I think there's still quite a bit of uncertainty on what beef demand looks like at least in early 2021. And that's going to be impacting those feeder cattle prices here in the fourth quarter as well.
We've already seen that impact on the feeder futures side, haven't we? That trade has really retreated in the last several days.
The feeder cattle futures board has aggressively moved lower in response to corn moving above $4. At this point, I think it's reacting to what crop production showed with a few less acres, a little bit less yield. And of course, we've seen great exports over the early part of this crop marketing year. And we still have a long way to go in the crop marketing year. So it does seem like the futures aren't out of line to show a price increase right now. But over $4 is a pretty large jump based on the fundamentals, I think, at this point. Now, could you see export demand continue to be as strong as it is right now year over year? That would be a very, very big export year if it did continue. And I don't like to necessarily hang my hat on something that only has 6 weeks of data, but it's something we're definitely going to continue to watch. But I would expect that corn price to ease off a little bit as we get further into the crop marketing year, and that should have those feeder cattle prices come back a little bit. I think there's a little bit of overreaction right now on the futures board, but still a lot of unknowns on the export side of things and where that feed cost really goes.
Not only watching what's happening with corn vis-a-vis the feeder futures trades, but even our finishing break-even levels, which were expected to rebound as we move further into the latter part of the year. But that is somewhat up in the air now, too, isn't it, Katelyn, as we make that transition into 21?
As the corn picture has evolved, we've had to evolve our break-evens, and what looked like a very profitable time frame probably in the second and third quarter of 2021 now has compressed that margin a little bit moving forward. But, there is going to be some opportunities. If we are buying feeder cattle at these depressed prices, that's going to lower the break even too. And so it's always a push and pull game a little bit between those two prices and where cattle feeders can end up on the return side of things. But 2021 still in general is looking better for cattle feeders than 2020.
Well, something else that, it ties into finishing cattle, but the entire cattle sector for sure, and that is what's happening with hay resources and hay prices as we are coming out of a generally dry growing season, most assuredly in the western part of the nation, but even here in parts of the Central Plains, and supplies may have tightened up considerably. What's happening in the hay market, Katelyn? You actually have a write-up on this on your LMIC.info website.
We do, and if folks are interested, just go to www.lmic.info and you can read the full article there. But to summarize it, essentially the western states have had extreme dryness that has impacted particularly the other hay crop because that tends to be not as irrigated as alfalfa. Mostly alfalfa is irrigated, and so those supplies haven't been damaged quite as much as other hay supplies, which is anything that's non-alfalfa. So nationally, we're looking at an other hay price that was 6% above a year ago in August, and that's according to USDA NASS agricultural prices. Alfalfa prices are actually less than a year ago. They've backed off about 4% in this August. Now, one of the unique things that has happened, and this doesn't happen very often, is that other hay is actually outpacing alfalfa prices. So you have a premium for that other hay right now in some states. Now, there's only a few on that list. Colorado is one. I'm sitting here in Denver, and the hay market here is very tight compared to a year ago and compared to alfalfa. But Arizona, Montana, Nevada, and Washington are also on that list as showing premiums relative to alfalfa. Now, for Washington, that's not as abnormal. They tend to have a very high-end other hay market that lends itself to a lot of exports going overseas to overseas dairy farms. They also have a large retail sale, small bales, towards horses, things like that demand a little bit higher quality other hay product. And so that's not as abnormal there. But for the other states, that would be very unique.
How do you see these trends resonating then when we bring it back to utilization at the cattle production level? What's this going to mean to the economics of finishing cattle or backgrounding calves, even cow-calf herds as we roll into the winter eventually here?
I think the drought this year has put probably more pressure at this point on the cow-calf sector. I wouldn't be surprised if it was fairly widespread that we were doing some supplemental feeding this summer. That's probably going to draw down stocks and elevate that hay price through to the next marketing year, especially on the other hay side. hay stocks have been tight for several years, and in 2020 we had what would have been a rebound in that level. They were up quite a bit year over year, but it was still a historical low level of stocks. And I think we're going to see that level get drawn back down to a very low level by historical terms. And so I don't anticipate having a huge break in price next year, although this year we saw that price climb throughout the year as our spring was actually fairly good from a forage production standpoint. And so if we have weather cooperate, it might not last that long, i.e. till next marketing year starts and you get that first cutting in. But on the cattle feeding side, I don't anticipate alfalfa prices changing all that much. We have seen seedings come back in certain areas reflective of those spots where alfalfa price has gotten higher. But overall, I'm not anticipating a whole lot more supply. They seem like they've had fairly normal yields and prices haven't escalated quite the way other hay has. So not a lot of changes expected on alfalfa.
Well, once again, Katelyn and company have put together an article on what's going on in the hay market at the LMIC.info website. And quickly in closing, Katelyn, any thoughts on this trading week ahead as far as where the fed and feeder markets might trend?
This holiday season is one that's going to be unique. From a meat buying perspective, it might be a long way off that we are, as consumers, thinking about what's going to be on that menu. But wholesalers and suppliers have absolutely started thinking about it, are purchasing, have made featuring programs, and are gathering those supplies to take place. And beef prices are significantly more expensive right now than turkey and ham. Ham is probably one of the least cost items at the grocery store. And we'll see how that plays out in this holiday season this year.
Interesting dynamics shaping up and unusual, as we've alluded to a time or two, in keeping with the theme of 2020. Katelyn, always appreciate your input. Many thanks. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
That's Katelyn McCullock, the director of the Livestock Marketing Information Center, along with us for this week's Cattle Market Remarks on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. Well, we've been lamenting for several weeks now that it's awfully dry around Kansas. And for you cattle producers heading into what is normally a dry stretch on the calendar anyway, there are some worries about water supplies drawing down excessively. We are bringing in now an extension watershed specialist for K-State who's based in south central Kansas, Ron Graber. He and other watershed specialists routinely work with producers on water quality and quantity issues. And you're hearing a bit about this as well from producers and others. You say, Ron, that these ponds, they're awfully drawn down. Some of these smaller streams are dried up. And producers wondering aloud what need they do to assure their cattle herds, in the case today, have adequate water heading into the winter.
Well, that's correct, Eric, and thanks for the invitation to come and visit a little bit today. And yeah, we here in south central Kansas are dry, like a lot of the state. We can't seem to get any rainfall, and some of these ponds and water sources that we typically depend on for a water source for livestock are low. So the quantity is not there, and in many cases the quality is not there. So yeah, and so producers are starting to say, well, what am I going to do about this? What's the solution, or what's the answer? Am I going to be able to utilize this winter forage, or do I have to go to another situation, maybe a dry lot? So yeah, there are many producers that are asking those questions, and we're trying to help them come up with some possible solutions.
A couple of the immediate possibilities here, neither are exactly options that producers are going to be eager about, and that would be hauling water during the winter or drilling a well. In some cases, that's what they're left to.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if we're looking at a pasture situation and we maybe have a stream or a pond, and those have gotten to a point where they're not a adequate or dependable supply, then yeah, what do we do? And the quick, easy, short-term solution is, well, we'll put some tanks in and start hauling water. And quite honestly, I don't know that I've ever had anybody tell me that they enjoy hauling water.
No.
It's just not something that we want to spend our time doing. And and it can be very time-consuming, can be fairly costly, depending on how close that pasture, that forage source might be. And then the other method is, okay, well, let's develop a more permanent, long-term solution, and that's really the direction that we try to steer folks to. Is let's think about this long-term, and maybe we need to talk about drilling a well, and putting in something a little more permanent with a tank. And a lot of times that involves doing a pump with solar panels, because we may be out somewhere where electricity is not very close. And so we go down that path and say, let's look at this, because we know this isn't going to be the only time that we're going to have dry weather. There are going to be other spells where we're apt to be in low water situations.
Thinking along these terms, creating alternative sources, alternative options here. Drilling the well in and of itself, that's the basic thing, but are there other things that producers can do to extend these water supplies?
Well, there are, and one of the things, and during dry spells where we have low water supplies in these ponds, may be a good time to go in and clean them out, dig them out. Oftentimes, they've silted in, and especially if cattle have had access to that pond, and we all have seen them go down in the water when it's in August and hot, and they're trying to get away from flies and cool off. And so we degradate those banks and basically don't have the storage capacity that we might have had when that pond was built. So we might, it might be a time to look at going in and actually physically cleaning that pond out, create some more storage, and then maybe look at trying to prevent the cattle from getting in that pond in the future. And so, there's a number of ways you can do that with a tank below the pond dam and that sort of thing, where we actually restrict access of the cattle to the pond. We can do a limited access point or ramp so they can still drink, but yet not physically get down in there and wade in the pond. And so that's one of the things that we encourage folks to do, especially when we get in these dry spells and the water's low anyway.
Ron, how important is it for producers to be acquainted with the amount of water needed for their given herd, depending on the number in that herd, of course? But are there standard calculations to go by there?
Well, there really are, and especially if we're going the route of maybe drilling a well and putting tanks in, and trying to kind of estimate what kind of quantity of water that we need to have available. And especially if we're looking at solar pumps, we encourage guys to have more than a 1-day supply. We'd like to have them see them have a 3-day supply of water. And so we need to look at, well, are we grazing yearlings? Are we grazing cows? And how much water are they actually gonna drink? And so, kind of a standard rule of thumb is a gallon for every 100 pounds of body weight, of live body weight is a pretty good place to start. So if you got a 5-weight calf, you can generally say they're probably going to drink about 5 gallons of water a day. On the other end of that, if we have a cow herd in there and we maybe have a 1,300 pound cow, then she's going to be, 12, 13 gallons a day is kind of a good place to start. Now, there's certainly some things that will affect that. We know that in the summer they're going to drink more as those air temperatures, those ambient temperatures go up. So that same cow that, this time of year might be drinking, 12 or 13 gallons of water a day, somewhere in that neighborhood. In the summer, that could get closer to 20 gallons a day. And on a dry forage that has very little moisture in it, these grasses this time of year are, pretty high percentage of dry matter, and there's just not much moisture there. Conversely, if we're looking at a wheat pasture kind of thing where that wheat pasture might be 2/3 or, even 80% water, then that water requirement changes a little bit. And so, the type of feed stuff that they're eating, how big the animal is, a lactating cow will drink more water than a dry cow. So there's some of those sort of things. But generally, if we kind of, start out at, about a gallon of water per 100 pounds of body weight, that's a pretty good place to start in trying to estimate how much water they might consume in a day.
Well, any number of ideas probably should be considered here. I want to toss out one more, and that is developing an existing spring, which up to this point for the producer hasn't been a direct watering resource. But there's an option to consider if one does it right.
Yeah, absolutely. And, spring development certainly can be a very good option in some situations. And but there are some things that we need to pay attention to in developing that. And, some guys will just kind of let those cattle drink out of wherever it's seeping out of the side of a hill. And, there again, they're kind of mudding it up and tearing it up.
Mm-hmm.
And we would like to see, a pipe in there going into a tank and, actually physically collecting it in a tank, and that might gravity feed and potentially kind of run over as well. And that's, in most cases, a more sustainable way to look at utilizing that spring.
But it's all in the design of these systems, no matter which way you go. You and colleagues at K-State have put together quite a collection of information, the technical side of establishing these alternate water sources and the quality side as well. There's quite a, pardon the expression here, reservoir of information that producers can use out of extension.
Yeah, Eric, that's correct. And we have put a number of those kind of fact sheets, front and back kind of deals together that have information, whether you're, looking for information on how to maybe put in a tire tank or a solar pump or, spring development, all of those kinds of things. We have a number of those resources available. They're all on our K-State K-Care website. So if somebody has internet and access to our website, that's an excellent place to go and look. And we've got some resources there that have pictures of some of these things that you can actually look at and discussion about how to maybe go about doing that. And so take a look at our website. Mm-hmm. They also can email us. We have a kind of a central email in Manhattan that they can email us at, and that email address is K-State K-Care. There's no dash in the K-State. It's all would be KSTATE KCARE at KSU.edu. And if they'll send an email, we can help get those resources. And, if they'd like for one of us, we're kind of positioned in different parts of the state. If they'd like for one of us to kind of consult with them, that'll get to us, that'll get forwarded to us as well. And so we do have a pretty good amount of resources available.
Excellent. Producers take full advantage of that. And once more, if you didn't catch that email address, you can go to the website and scare that up directly. The website is kkare.ksu.edu, kcare.ksu.edu. Well, Ron, appreciate you giving us this input on what producers should at least think about in coming up with alternative water sources for livestock, as, again, our dry conditions are expected to stick around for a while, unfortunately. We appreciate your time right here.
Well, thanks, Eric. Good to visit today.
That's Ron Graber. He's a K-State Research and Extension watershed specialist based in South Central Kansas. We'll be back after the break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. In today's agricultural news, just how promising is the latest outlook for meat imports and exports? USDA's Stephanie Ho gets some insight from World Ag Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski.
World Ag Outlook Board Chair Mark Jekanowski has the latest outlook for the meat trade.
No change in the beef export forecast for the current year for 2020.
However, he says the forecast for 2021 has been pulled back a bit because of a weakness in observed global demand.
For many countries, China among them, but others as well. So that's a 200 million pound change from our forecast last month, and then a 300 million pound reduction for our 2021 forecast relative to last month.
Meanwhile, with trade prospects for broilers,
we increased a bit for 2020, again, based on some observed trends and data, and then increased even further for next year for 2021. And that's consistent with our expectations for lower prices going forward.
He adds that imports of beef, mostly processing grade from Australia and Argentina, are expected to increase. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
The long-range winter weather forecast doesn't look all that promising for row crops. Gary Crawford has more with USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey on the impact that producers can expect if the forecast turns out to be correct.
The La Nina weather pattern is operating now and is projected to get stronger.
And that is expected to have a fairly profound winter impact on U.S. climate and weather.
And on agriculture, this from Agriculture Department meteorologist Brad Rippey. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center says basically that drought will likely persist, spread, and intensify this winter in much of the southwest quadrant of the country from the plains westward.
Of course, that leads to poor pasture and rangeland conditions and can greatly increase stress on the hard red winter wheat crop across the southern half of the Great Plains.
And the drought's already covering a huge area of the country.
47% is in drought at this time.
The highest since September of 2013. Meanwhile, on the prediction for a colder, stormier winter across the northern plains and upper Midwest.
Generally, that would be favorable for winter wheat, at least as long as we can maintain a snow cover.
But could be stressful for livestock. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And finally, in today's agricultural news, Eric Atkinson reports on K-State's annual series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes, which begin later this month and continue in November and December. As Eric learns, this year's Income Tax Institutes are being modified to allow participants to choose between an in-person session or an online session. Eric has more with Roger McCohen.
Well, Jeff, the Agricultural Economics Department here at K-State is set to go with the 72nd annual series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes. This program is intended for tax professionals or even those who prepare their own taxes, and it is designed to provide up-to-date training on current tax law, on regulations, and more. The program does stress practical information to facilitate the filing of individual, small business, and farm tax returns. Now, it shouldn't be a surprise that this year's series is somewhat outside the norm. We'll let Roger McCohen explain. Roger, as our listeners know, is a professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law. He's also an adjunct professor in the Agricultural Economics Department at K-State and the coordinator of these institutes.
Actually, a little different setup this year because of the virus issue this year. We're going to do 4 in-person schools, 2-day schools each, and we're going to do 3 online webinars. And now they're set for specific dates, and we're going to be in person in Garden City on October 27 and 28, then in person in Topeka on November 9 and 10, also in person in Wichita on November 12 and 13, and in person in Salina on December 7 and 8. And the online webinars will be October 29 and 30, November 23 and 24, and December 9 and 10. And it'll be myself and Paul Neefer. Paul writes Farm CPA Today blog. He and I have done numerous tax seminars across the country for a number of years. He and I will do day 1 in person in Garden City, and the very first webinar we'll do day 1. And then second day, every location will be myself and Ross Hurst. Ross has been on the Tax Institute schedule for a number of years, and he's retired IRS. He retired as the IRS practitioner liaison for the state of Kansas, and many people are familiar with Ross. And then on day 2 at the other locations other than the first 2 events, will be a colleague of mine at Washburn Law School, Lori McMillan, who teaches tax at the law school, and Randy Carlson, who is a tax preparer, tax professional out of Clay Center. And Randy has done nationwide seminars through his own company for a number of years. So an excellent setup of teaching teams for both days. I encourage people to check it out. If they haven't attended one of the tax institutes or haven't done so in a number of years, check us out. I think they'll really like the teaching teams, great set of materials and lots of material relevant to their practice. And all that information can be found on K-State Ag Econ Ag Manager website.
Roger McOwen there from the Washburn University School of Law. Again, K-State's 72nd annual series of Kansas Income Tax Institutes will go as follows. The in-person sessions in Garden City, October 27th and 28th, in Topeka, November the 9th and the 10th, in Wichita, November the 12th and 13th, and in Salina, December the 7th and the 8th. Again, those are the in-person gatherings. The online sessions in webinar form, the first on October the 29th and 30th, the second webinar November 23rd and 24th, and the third webinar December the 9th and the 10th. Each of the institutes begins at 8 o'clock in the morning and will adjourn at 4:30 each day. For the in-person sessions, lunch will be served on-site, and there will be a morning and afternoon break each day. So, tax professionals and preparers, look into being part of one of these institutes. To register or find out more, contact Rich Llewellyn at K-State. His email address, rvl@ksu.edu. Or to find out more, go to agmanager.info. That's agmanager.info. Jeff?
Thanks, Eric. And this reminder to listen to the podcast version of Agriculture Today, visit agtoday.net, agtoday.net, or using an app on your mobile device, type these search keywords, Agriculture, Today, Kansas, and you'll find this program. By tapping the subscribe button, brand new episodes of Agriculture Today will automatically arrive on your device. That's agtoday.net. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H youth involved in the Science of Agriculture Challenge will be making their final presentations in one form or another at the Kansas Farm Bureau building in Manhattan next month. Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen says the teams are ready to present their findings. Anissa, teams have been working on the Science of Agriculture projects, and they're getting ready for their state competition.
That's right. We're really excited to be able to host our Science of Agriculture final competition November 14th in Manhattan.
Cover some of what they go through, because they are identifying projects in their local communities and then doing research.
Right. So the really exciting thing about the Science of Agriculture Challenge is that it takes teams of 3 to 5 youth in grades 6 through 12. They work to solve on an agriculture issue in their community, statewide, worldwide, and then they learn how to use science and engineering practices along with those coaches and mentors to develop a solution to the problem. And then they research this all summer. They've been working on this since April. Then they'll present their final topic to a panel of judges in November.
So they've had a chance to do in-person, virtual, and maybe some more modified in-person through this whole process, haven't they?
They have. It's been really great to see some of the teams, the way that they've been able to adapt to our ever-changing world. When we started off this competition, it was right before the pandemic was putting all of us in a different kind of place. And so they met in person a little bit, and then they had to go virtual for a while. And then they've been doing some modified meeting. And of course, the interesting thing is that these teams are from all over the state of Kansas. And so it's been interesting to see how they've adapted due to their local circumstances and been able to share their project virtually or in a modified virtual state, or some have even been able to do their projects in person. We watched some videos with them wearing their face coverings and things like that. So it's just really cool to see the way the youth are able to adapt so easily to the things that are thrown at them.
The other thing that's interesting about this is they're working with mentors and coaches, so they're getting kind of that worldview as well.
Yeah, so the really exciting thing about this is while the teams of youth are the ones really directing what the project is, and you can really see that in the results. When the youth are super involved, the project just kind of takes a life of its own because they're so focused on what they're doing. But they couldn't do that without the help of those adult mentors and coaches, because the coaches really have to take kind of a back seat and just help guide the youth. They don't need to be an expert in the problem, or they don't need to be an expert in what the youth decide the solution is. They just need to be able to help facilitate that learning. They guide the questions. They help to think about the what if, or should we try this, and then let the youth really determine the way the project goes.
Do you know what the projects are at this point? Have you had a chance to see any of the projects?
I've seen a couple of them, although I don't really want to spoil it, because I would love to have, if we do have a virtual format, I would love people to hop on and be able to watch some of the presentations. I do know that one of the projects has to do with animal welfare and some chiropractic work, and then another one has to do with some food waste, which I think is an important thing, as we kind of saw earlier this year when people started to panic about where our food is going to come from and what we do with waste and energy and things like that.
In addition to doing the research, part of this also involves making the presentation, and I think that they have had a chance to do an initial presentation to get some feedback on that.
Yeah, so that's the other component of this project, which I really enjoy, is the presentation. Normally in the past, we presented in person at Kansas State Fair. They've been gracious enough to partner with us and give us a place to present. But this year we actually had the teams record a virtual presentation, and then we had evaluators from the Kansas 4-H department and the 4-H Foundation do some initial evaluations on not really the content of the project, but the presentation, because we want those youth to be ready to present in whatever format they have to. So it was really good to give them some feedback on their presentations.
It's important to make sure that you're hitting the high points and that you're really pointing out how the research was done.
Yes, and the evaluators are also able to kind of help them fill in those gaps. The youth are usually super excited about their projects, and they know so much about them that there might be parts that if you're just the regular person off the street might not understand, and so those evaluators are able to help them identify areas within their presentations that they need to fill in. And then, of course, learning how to present social distancing, and even in a virtual presentation, how to speak louder if you're having to wear a face covering. There's things in the presentation styles that we had to really address that we never would have ever thought that we had to talk about.
And they also, I assume, have a time limit, so they have to be concise?
Yes. So the time limit is the presentation is 20 minutes. They can do a PowerPoint, they can do hands-on, they can do that however. And then in the final presentation, the evaluators will actually have 10 minutes to ask questions. So it's really interesting to watch the youth answer those questions on the spot. And our evaluators are tough. They really want to know what these youth have been doing, and it's great to see the youth be able to just step up and answer those questions. You can tell they've done the work, for sure.
The goal here to get them more interested in science and technology and introduce them to the opportunities that exist?
That's right. We want to make sure that we're growing the next generation of science practitioners, and plus agriculture is everywhere. And I think it's important that we've able to look at these projects across the board and say, you know, I didn't realize that that would be considered an agriculture project. I mean, it just looks so different. So that's been super exciting.
And you'll have a chance when everything is all said and done to look back on this and see some things that work that may allow you to expand the program.
Right. And we wouldn't be able to expand our program without the help of our sponsors. And so we want to thank Cargill again for their investment in this program. They're our lead partner. They supported this program from 2018. Through their investment in this program, they really are going to help to transform the food and agriculture industry. And then we're super excited that we have a new partnership with Corteva AgriScience this year. I think if anything that this has really shown us is the teams don't have to be from the local community. We could maybe create some teams from around the state, and the youth are so used to partnering because of school and virtually, and hopefully we can find some more teams for next year.
That's Kansas 4-H Extension Specialist Anissa Jepsen. For more information on the Science of Agriculture Challenge, visit kansas4h.org or contact your local county or district extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.